So we're on 568, 569, Parshas Tzav. So Tzav begins that Hashem says to Moshe, Tzav is Aaron. So instead of Hashem speaking directly to Aaron, he speaks to Moshe and tells Moshe what to tell Aaron. So he has an intermediary here. He says, Tzav is Aaron, I want you to command Aaron, V'ez Banav, and his children. Lay more, the following. Zos Torah Sa'ola. This is the laws pertaining to the Ola offering. It's a sacrifice. Hi ha'ola al ha'mugda al ha'mizbeach kol ha'layla ad ha'boker ve'esh ha'mizbeach tukad bo. And it goes through the rules of what it is. In English it tells us this is the law of the offering. It's the elevation offering that stays on the flame on the altar all night until the morning, and the fire of the altar shall remain a flame upon it. Right? The Kohen shall wear specific clothes that he wears when he does it, and then he should remove his garments and put on other garments, and then he should get rid of the ash. So what it's telling us is the following. It said Hashem tells Moshe to tell Aaron, you know what you do first thing in the morning when you come to the Beis HaMikdash or to the Mishkan is you clean the garbage. Take out the garbage. Right? He says you have this special sacrifice that's been burning all night, so now in the morning it's all ashes. So you have to come in, you have to put on specific clothes, and you have to take your shovel and your broom, and you should remove the ash that's on the altar and take it outside of the community to a pure place. Right? So it's a pretty strange thing that the first thing that they're being told to do is to take out the garbage from the night before. And many of the commentaries talk about it. The first thing is here you have a very dignified person. I mean, you've got, right, you know, he's telling Aaron and his children, you're telling the Kohen, right, this is what you need to do. You have to put on, you have to get up in the morning. Imagine you get up in the morning, you prepare yourself for work, you put on your special Kohen uniform, you go to the temple, you get to the temple, you change to another uniform, you go and take out the garbage, right? You get rid of the ashes from the night before, then you come back, right, and you put back on your original uniform and you do your work. So first thing you have to ask, there's a million questions here, like why don't they just have like an underling do this, like a Levi. A Levi's job is to be the assistant to the Kohen. Let the Levi do it. His job could be to do it. And next is, why does he go out of his way to put on special clothes to do this? Right? It's not like he's putting on work clothes, like clothes that are, you know, that, like for instance, when I was a kid, I remember there was a fellow that he was one of the few Holocaust survivors in my community. He was a house painter, a very dignified fellow. He used to get up every morning and put on a suit, and he would go to work. So he'd come to your house and to paint your house, and he would change into his work clothes, then he would paint your house, then he'd finish, he'd clean up, put his suit on and go home. Right? Why? Because he saw himself as a person who dressed with dignity, even though his job was such that that it wasn't a job that you did dress that way. So you say that it's similar to like the Kohen. Here you think the Kohen comes, he's dressed with dignity, then he has to put on another suit, but it's not a work suit. It's another dignified suit that he uses for this. So we want to see what is the message that they're trying to tell us, that the Kohen has to do this. So I usually tell the story when I teach this idea that, you know, you can imagine what it's like, certainly in my life, and maybe it's exactly the same in yours, in your own way, right a couple hours before Yom Kippur. Right here I've gone through this whole process, as we all do. We start with the beginning of Elul. Every day we work on ourselves. We get like closer and closer to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment. And here, right, then we have the 10 days of repentance. And finally we have this climax coming with Yom Kippur. Right? You know, you have all these people coming and all these things going on, and it's really a very highly charged time. Right? And so you go home. You go in the afternoon to shul early, and they have the afternoon service, mincha service, and then you go home and you have your final meal. So you have this final meal, and you're already starting to feel the feeling of the spirit of the day and the seriousness of the day. And I grab my kittel and I grab everything, and I got to make sure I get to shul on time. You know, I got to be there to make sure everything's running okay. And as I'm on my way to go right to shul, as I'm going out the door, my wife says, "Hey, don't forget to take out the garbage, right? Garbage from the meal." Right? So you say to yourself, I say to myself, like, you know, here I am. I'm the rabbi of the synagogue. I got 1,000 people coming to hear me speak. Right? I'm going into the synagogue to make sure everything is running right. It's the holiest day of the year, and I got to take out the garbage. Right? What it's telling me is that you know, no matter who you are or what day it is or who you think you are, everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. Everybody's the same. In other words, don't think that because it's such a special day that I'm an extraordinary person. You're a regular person. It's an extraordinary day, but you still have to take out the garbage, right? So, in my house, that's what I got to do, right? So it's the same idea. The Kohen's told, you have a very elevated position. You're always dealing with people who are having all of these needs and these flaws and these issues and these reasons to come to see you, and you're there to help them. So you're like a super person. You're holy, you're working in the temple, you don't have to deal with the outside world, and you're going to start thinking that you are not a regular person. When it boils down to it, you still are. And therefore, the Almighty says, first thing you do is hit the reset button in the morning and remind yourself who you are before you get in and start working for the day. You realize, right, you take out the garbage in the morning. You're a regular person. Now you go do your job. Don't start thinking that you're such an elevated person all the time, and then you'll start being arrogant and you won't do your job right because people won't be able to relate to you. Remember who you are. And so this message that it's saying here to the Kohen and in my story to me, but it's a message for everyone in the same way, that there are times in our lives when we're elevated, we're put in a very specific, special position. We have to always remember to not let it get to our head, to think that we're different than everyone else, or we're extraordinary. We can be extraordinary in certain ways, but it doesn't make us better than others. And therefore we have to do things often in order to remind ourselves of this. Remember, because we have a rule. This rule is, we've talked about a number of times, but this rule is very pertinent over Passover. And we learned from the Rambam. The Rambam tells us that mitzvos, right, that we do, that have an action with it, and that take effort, are the ones that end up affecting us the most. Like, for instance, probably the most difficult holiday of the year has got to be Passover. Right? There's so much work involved, there's so much money involved, there's so much just involved in the making Passover, right, over the course of 1 week, right, that you'd think that that's the holiday that people really just don't like. It's, I have to do it, so I got to do it, right? But if you go to anyone, like, let's say in January, and you say, what's your favorite holiday of the year? Almost everyone tells you Passover. And why is that? And that we can actually contrast it with another holiday. If you go to a person who is minimally observant or not well educated in Judaism or not observant, and you ask them to name the major holidays of the year, so they'll name most of the holidays. One holiday they will almost always not mention is the holiday of Shavuos. Holiday of Shavuos is as significant in Jewish life as the holiday of Passover. It's just as significant. However, most people don't even know it exists. It's the holiday that celebrates that we received the Torah from God. Right? That's a very significant holiday. However, why don't people remember it? It clearly seems that the reason is because there's no active mitzvah. There's nothing that you do. Like, you don't shake a lulav, you don't sit in a sukkah, you don't eat matzah, you don't clean your house, you don't do a seder. You celebrate the holiday, but there's no specific act that you do in order to fulfill it. And therefore, people forgot it. But Passover, which is so much work and so much effort that we work at it so deeply, right, it becomes the favorite holiday of everyone, because the more effort you put into something, the more in the long run people happen to like it, even though they'll claim that they don't. The point of the Rambam is that any mitzvah that has an action with it, you have to do something. The more the action is, the more we remember and love that mitzvah. Therefore, whatever that mitzvah is, like, why is it that people they have a baby and everyone starts talking about the bris and how great it is? They're going to have a bris and you can't wait for the bris, and it's very painful. It's not very painful for the baby. It's somewhat painful for the baby, but it's certainly painful for the parents to have to go through it. But yet everybody loves it because there's an action involved with it. So the Kohen can't just be told, don't be arrogant. The Kohen has to do an action to show him, right, within himself, not to be arrogant, to realize he's just like everyone else. So they, instead of saying to him, every day he comes in, recite to yourself 10 times, I'm just like everyone else, I'm just like everyone. They don't do that. It says, take out the garbage. It doesn't say because you're less like everyone else, but you get the message. And then the Kohen becomes a humble person because of it. And that's really why the Torah tells us this, that it's so important that the Kohen starts out with it. And the reason that he changes his clothes is not just because they might get dirty. It's because he is changing his clothes. Whenever we put on special clothes, we're trying to show that something's important. Like, for instance, we dress for Shabbos. Right, so people will ask me, I'm going away on a vacation, like I went to the Dominican Republic on a vacation a couple years ago, and there was, maybe 8, 9 observant families where we were, and they had everything kosher and so forth, and you could keep Shabbos, but it wasn't a religious area. So the people said, what do I got to dress up for Shabbos for? I'm on a vacation. I'll just wear my weekday clothes, my leisurely clothes. The answer is that that's not correct. You don't dress for other people on Shabbos. You dress for Shabbos. By dressing up for Shabbos, you're showing that Shabbos is significant. It's important. That's what's happening here. When you put on your special uniform in order to take out the garbage, you are showing that the act of taking out the garbage has an important aspect to it. That important aspect is to teach us that we should not consider ourselves better than others. That's what the message is there. And that's a very important one. That's why it goes on for a while, and the parsha begins with it. Why Moshe is instructed to make sure Aaron knows this. And then it goes on with other types of sacrifices that are offered for different purposes. And you have the mincha sacrifice, which we talked about last week, and a few of the others. And now one of the sacrifices that is spoken about here is called the soda. The soda, using a suf, the soda sacrifice, which is the same word as todah, which anyone who knows any Hebrew knows it means thank you. And it's called the sacrifice of thanks, the Thanksgiving sacrifice. It's given as a sacrifice by a person who had something extraordinary happen to them. So, like a person has an operation, and they come through well, they would offer the sacrifice. Somebody has a baby, they'd offer the sacrifice. Somebody is in a dangerous situation there, and they come out, they offer the sacrifice. Anytime that you notice that there was some type of miraculous thing happened in order to help you, right? We don't just consider it regular day-to-day life. We consider this a miracle, and therefore we give a sacrifice for it. We give this thanks sacrifice where we thank God for doing it for us. Now, there's a number of rules with this sacrifice, and one of them is that it's one of the only sacrifices that you have to consume in one day. Most of them are 2 days. It would be a day, a night, and a day, most of them. This one is just a day and a night, and that's it. It has to be used before that night is finished. It has to be consumed. And there's something extraordinary about that. The rule is different, and it must be to tell you a special message. Part of the idea behind it is that the thank you sacrifice, when you're thanking God for doing something for you, is something that is over a short period of time, because in general human beings get used to things. We know that when there's a bad thing that are going on, we get used to it. Right? You notice how when they started, talking with some of the ISIS and these other Arabic groups that were started, when they first started reading about them, everybody was shocked. People were afraid. People didn't know what to do. Now, like you open the newspaper, and today it opened up. It says Boko Haram, right? That's a part of ISIS now. They kidnapped 400 people. Today it was in the paper. And what do? You see it, you turn the page and keep drinking your coffee, right? Because we're used to it. And it's not good to get used to it, but we do. We also get used to good things happening, right? It gets to the point where, we're used to making a salary. We're used to having air conditioning. We're used to all of the things that really are things that we shouldn't be used to, but we get used to it to the point where they become necessities, right? This idea is reflected in the concept that this sacrifice has to be used in one day rather than over a 2-day period, because we very quickly grow callous to the good things that happen. So the Almighty is telling us, by the fact that this sacrifice has to be used that quickly, is telling us that you need, right, in order, you need to do this quick while you still have the feeling for it, because your feeling will fade. And this way it reinforces your feeling. The second part of it is also how do you use this sacrifice is that you eat it. Right? Sacrifices are very rare that you just burn them up. There is one, and it talks about it in this parsha, but in general, sacrifices are part of it's given to the Kohen, part of it is burned up, part of it is given to the owner, right? And they eat it. You eat the sacrifice. So if you have to have a cow and you offer it as a sacrifice, and you have to eat it over a day and a night and a day, right? So, that's hard enough. But if I tell you have to eat it in a day, right, it's not possible. So what do you do if you have a lot of food to eat, like an enormous amount of food to eat, and you have to eat it by a certain date? What do? You make a party. So people come over and they eat it with you, right? So that's what you do here. When a person has something good that's happened to them, the Torah is shortening the amount of time to make the sacrifice so that you have to consume it quickly, so you make a party. And what will you do at the party? You'll tell people why you made the sacrifice. So you'll publicize the fact that God made this miracle for you, right? That this good thing happened, which is good for everybody's belief and understanding of religious life, because now everybody hears about how what God did in order to help you either get out of this dangerous situation or so forth. So today we don't have sacrifices, but we have a prayer that we say in lieu of it, which is the same thing. And we say that if a person they take a trip in an airplane, even though today it's not as dangerous, they go over the ocean. A person has an operation where they have a general anesthetic, and many different things that happen that we come out fine. So we say a special prayer in shul. We get called up. We say one line in order to do the same idea, to give thanks to God for doing it. We don't have a sacrifice, but we actually have this. We still do it, and it's for the same reason. As long as you still feel the joy of the success, you can still say that prayer. And we say that, and we don't say it to ourselves, we say it out loud, because we want to share it with everyone. So people should ask us, oh, you said HaGomel, which is the name of the prayer. Why did you say it? And people will say, oh, because my wife had a baby. Oh, because we went on the ocean and everything was fine. Oh, because I had an operation with a general anesthetic and I came out fine. So people will then share in the miracles.
How come you only say the prayer when you go over the ocean and not if you just fly an hour away?
Well, it's really because the Talmud made the prayer originally before there were airplanes. Right? They made it, and going in the ocean is always dangerous because you can't control the water. You could be out in the ocean and it could be fine and nothing happens, and you go out in the ocean and it can be all types of turbulence. So a plane, I would venture to guess that a plane flying over the ocean or flying over land, I'm guessing it doesn't really make a difference. The plane is still the same. But because the Talmud says when you travel over the ocean, so then whenever we go over the ocean, we say that. So when you fly over the ocean, we presume that it includes it. But if you travel within a country, like if I go from here to Buffalo, I wouldn't say a prayer to thank God for the miracle of my getting to Buffalo, because nothing extraordinary happened. So there, if you fly over land, also you don't do it. Right? So it's not necessarily that it was purposeful that you didn't or did. When the prayer was made, there weren't planes at all. Right? Even though the Talmud refers to them, they didn't have them. They just imagined them. Okay, we then have a sacrifice, what they call the guilt offering on 573, and the sin offering on 573. Now, these are interesting also. The sin offering is where a person goes, right, and he does something wrong. Now, most people might think that you would offer a sin sacrifice when you do something wrong on purpose. In other words, God tells us not to eat cheeseburgers, and I got a desire for it, and I said, I'm going to do it. Right? So I go and I eat this cheeseburger, then I would offer the sacrifice. Right? I'd have to go and offer the sacrifice because I did it on purpose. It's actually not that way. The sacrifice is only offered when you break the Torah by mistake. When you did it on purpose, right, that requires a higher level of repentance than simply a sacrifice, because that's like saying that you can buy your forgiveness because you buy the sacrifice. In a case of doing something by mistake, where it was Shabbos and you and you forgot that it was Shabbos, and you turned the lights on. So there you offer a sacrifice. There's not a high level of guilt, but there's a level of neglect. You neglected Shabbos. In other words, if I'd say to you, I call you up in the morning really early, and I say, listen, you got to come here right away. This is going on. You would get dressed first. You wouldn't just run out in your pajamas. You'd come out, you'd get dressed, and then you'd come, right? You don't forget to put your clothes on. So the same way that you don't forget to put your clothes on, you shouldn't forget that it's Shabbos. The fact that we do means that we're not giving it the seriousness that we should be. For that, we give a sacrifice. Right? That's the idea behind it, that a sin sacrifice comes from forgetting, right, or doing something by mistake, not knowing the law, not thinking the law applies, not when you do it on purpose, right? Only when it's done by mistake. And that sacrifice is offered. And it's an important thing. Because what are you actually doing? So you imagine this picture, right? In the days of the temple, a person has to offer a sin sacrifice, so that could be a cow. So you go to a farm and you buy a cow, because the average person doesn't have cows, right? Live in a city, you don't have a cow. So you go and you buy the cow. Now, they didn't have cars back then, so you used to take the cow and you'd attach a rope to it and you walk through the old city of Jerusalem with a cow. Now, everyone who sees you walking through the old city of Jerusalem with a cow is going to know why you're doing it. Right? Why you don't walk around with a cow? It's not a pet. Right? You're going to the temple to offer it. Means you must have done something wrong. Right? So now everybody realizes that you did something wrong by mistake, right? But you did it, and you had to spend an enormous amount of money for a cow because no matter what it cost, it had to be expensive back then. It's a cow. It's a big animal, right? And then you wander through the entire city with it. You go into the temple and you offer it as a sacrifice. So here, all of the actions are to help reinforce within us the idea that we have to remember that these things are priorities, that they're important. Right? And by virtue of the fact that everybody sees us, by virtue of the fact of the large money that we spend, right? So we go and we do this. It's in order so that we should remember that. We should realize how significant whatever it is that we did wrong, whatever the significance of doing it right is. And that's why it's done in such a way. That's the sin offering. So he just goes through a number of different ones. There's a large discussion throughout this entire parsha of the idea of a person being appropriately prepared spiritually to offer a sacrifice or not. The way that a person is prepared to offer a sacrifice is really the big hindrance is their ability to go into the temple. Not everyone can go into the temple all the time. There are certain times when people are not spiritually able. It's not a guilt or a good or a bad. It's a reality. If I touch or come into contact with someone who touched a dead body, then I can't go into the temple until I become spiritually cleaned from it. Other similar things are examples of different levels of it. It's not a punishment. It's not good and bad. It's just a reality. Like I have blue eyes or I have brown eyes. You can be spiritually able to enter the temple or not. If you're not, you can become. Right? It's not difficult to do. But if you are, then you're spiritually able. And you're not, you're spiritually unable. And that's really all it is. The people like to translate these words as spiritually clean and not spiritually clean. It's not really true, of course, because there is no idea of something being clean or not clean when there is no physical aspect to it. Right? It's not like one of the ways that a person, I'd say, probably one of the most controversial ways that a person becomes unable to give a sacrifice would be a woman during menstruation. Right? Now, is she doing something wrong? Did she do something bad? No, not at all. It's a reality that when a person is in this state, they have to wait till that state ends, and then they go through a process in order so they can go back into the temple. It's not a good, bad, lesser, or more. It's just a reality that affects us. So that concept is continual through all these sacrifices, that a person must be spiritually able in order to enter the temple to offer a sacrifice. And it's a very important part of it. And it keeps speaking about that. Going back to the sacrifice that I mentioned before called the Toda, the thank you sacrifice, one of the things that's important is that the word Toda has two meanings. It means thank you, and it also means to acknowledge. Like, I say thank you for doing something for me. I am also acknowledging that you did something for me. Right? Why is it that I want someone to say thank you to me for doing something? It's not that I really want them to, like, it makes it better if they say thank you. What it really does is they're acknowledging that they needed something and I helped them with it. So therefore, they're acknowledging that they're not perfect and they didn't do everything themselves and somebody helped them, and they're acknowledging to me that I was the one who did that. That's called hoda, which is the same word as toda. It's just a different grammatical tense. That means to acknowledge, while toda means to think. But really they're the same idea. And that's why you'll notice in the silent prayer that we say, no matter when it is that you say it, you have one section that begins with, it says, Modim anachnu lach. Right? It's near the end of the Shemona Esrei. And they bow when they say it. And what's unique about it is when the Chazan says it, he says one paragraph. At the same time that he's saying that, the people in the shul say a different paragraph, which is right next to it. But they actually say it. Most of the time we're just listening to him. This time you actually say it. And the commentaries ask, why is that? So that paragraph is the paragraph of Modim, where we acknowledge to God that everything we have in our life comes from Him. And we thank Him for that, and we acknowledge it. And so therefore they ask, why is it that of all of the parts within this silent prayer, when it's being repeated, you have to say this. Right? You don't say the rest of those things. You listen. This you have to say. So the commentaries say the reason is because when it comes to showing appreciation, you have to do it yourself. You can't have somebody else show appreciation for you. Right? You have to show your appreciation yourself, and it's easy. When somebody does something for you, and you say, listen, are you going to see Joe? Yeah. When you see him, tell him that I say thank you for the loan. Right? That's not a very, nice way of doing it, right? Because you yourself aren't taking the time. Right? There are various levels. You can send them an email, you can send them a thank you card, whatever it is that you do. The more minimal effort you put into it, the more it's appreciated by the person who gets it, and the more you accomplish by doing it. When we say, the bottom line is that when it comes to acknowledging that someone helped you, someone else can't do it for you. You have to do it yourself, which is why in this prayer we say the words ourselves, even though there's nowhere else in the prayer that we do that. We say those words in order so that we have the lesson that when someone does something good for me, I feel it and I want to express it myself. I don't want someone else to express it for me. It has to be that I express it, because my expressing it teaches me humility. Right? I didn't become the people say by the time I'm 30 I want to be a millionaire. That was a long time ago. I guess it's not so difficult necessarily anymore. But I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30. Right? And in the end, the guy will say, I'm a self-made man. I had nothing and I made $1 million. Well, that's a heretical statement, because we don't believe that anybody is a self-made person. We believe that you, of course, put in effort, that you have talents, that you have hard work, that you have all types of ideas of how to do things. You certainly play a role. But first thing, God gave you those things. And secondly is God plays a role in what happens to you. So therefore we have to realize that it's not just me that does these things. It's my involvement with God. The idea of modim is what you're saying. When you say, I acknowledge God, that my living comes through you, that my ability to live comes through you, my health comes from you. Does the fact that I go to the gym every day and exercise every day help me with my health? Yes, it does. But ultimately, it's God. God says if you do these things, right, those are paths to having a longer life. But the bottom line, a healthy person can die just like an unhealthy person can die. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be healthy. You have to put in the effort. But it actually comes from God, the good and the bad. And that's why it's done in this way. Okay. So the rest of the parsha deals really with the same idea, but so since we're still talking about sacrifices, and we're right before Passover, let's talk about the Passover sacrifice. It's actually not in this parsha, but that concept is referred to. The Passover sacrifice was a unique sacrifice. It was if you remember in the story of going out of Egypt, God tells them that they're to take the lamb, which was a symbol of the god of Egypt, and you're to attach it with a chain to a stake in your front yard, and it stays there, right, for a few days, and then you take that lamb and you slaughter it, and you cook it on a rotisserie whole with all of the insides in it. Right? You take off the coat, but you cook it whole on a rotisserie with all the insides. And then you take a group, primarily a family, but it could be a group, and you eat that sacrifice outside the temple, but you eat that sacrifice. And there are much commentaries about this sacrifice because it's a unique one. First thing is that it's unique in that you have to eat it with a unit of people. You're not supposed to really do it alone. Secondly is everybody is required to do it. Every single Jew is required to eat this sacrifice. And then the sacrifice itself, that it's specifically a lamb, it's specifically on rotisserie, it's specifically eaten with all of the insides inside of it still. You're not supposed to suck the marrow out of the bones, right, to that extent, but you're supposed to eat it in its entirety. So what is the message it is giving us? So firstly, on a simple level, we understand that you have to eat this with your family. The family unit is extremely important in Judaism. It was attacked by almost every nation in the world, including Egypt, who tried to destroy the holiness of marriage that we have, the idea of a husband and wife together, where the rest of the world sees that the relationship between a man and a woman is dirty. With us, we consider it holy. We consider it a very important thing. And that if done correctly, it's a gift of one person to another. That's one part of family. Secondly, is the ability for parents to raise children, is to teach their children to live the right kind of life. So they hand over the Torah, they hand over ethics, they hand over what it means to be a mensch to their children. That's what a family does. You don't say, I'm going to hire a teacher to do it, or I'm not going to do it, or I'm not getting paid, so I won't do it. A parent does that for their child. That's part of family. This was an important message that God wanted the Jews to get. And right at the beginning of our existence, that family plays an important role. And what if you don't have family? Then people invite you to join them in their eating of the sacrifice. It's not exclusive to family. It's inclusive of family and then others. So that's why you see it's so common by people to have very large seders, inviting all kinds of people. Right? Sometimes I wonder how you have so many people. If everybody makes a seder and everybody has lots of people, then where are they getting those people from? Because everybody makes a seder. Right? And of course, I'm exaggerating, but the idea that people invite so many people for a seder is reminiscent of the idea of the original sacrifice was done by one person, invited many people to attend that event, the Passover offering, which our Passover Seder is symbolic of. Right? So that fact that they did that was to show family, friends are extremely important. Community is extremely important. That's one of the reasons why you ate the animal in its entirety. You didn't take the insides out, which normally you do. That's because it's trying to show you a completeness, a unity of things, because the unity of something, it shows you the greatness of it. It's all unified. Everybody is together. Everything is together. I'm eating the entire animal because I am hoping that the entire family is together. The entire Jewish people is together. We do it as a symbol of that. We don't break the bones or suck out the marrow from the bones in the Passover offering, because we're not eating it because we're hungry. We're eating it to send this message. By breaking the bones and sucking out the marrow, we're saying that there wasn't even enough to eat, so I'm going to have to eat more. Right? That's not the idea behind it either. So all of these rules are pertinent to this concept. The people who could not eat, right, certainly were non-Jews, because they had no obligation to eat it. People who didn't have the spiritual ability at the short period of time to be able to do it, they couldn't do it. and therefore they were excluded. But everyone else, for the most part, is included in order that that should be a part of things. Because it was so significant and important, people came to God and they said, look, in order for all of the Jews to be spiritually able to eat this, there's going to at least be one Jew who won't be. First thing is somebody could die, like 5 minutes before the Passover Seder, and anybody who is in that house with a dead person can't eat the Passover offering. So it says that when this happened, the Jews went to God and they said, like, what's wrong with me? Like, I didn't do this. You're punishing me. I didn't become spiritually unable because I was reckless. I did it because someone died and I had to help. I did it because, I got my period today and I had no control over that. Whatever it was that happened, they went to God and they complained. The Passover offering is very important. I can't participate in it. So he made what's called Pesach Sheni, which is going to come up in the next few weeks. Pesach Sheni means the second Passover. And that is 30 days to the day after Passover begins. You had the ability, if you didn't offer the sacrifice before because you weren't able to, that you can do it then. So God gave us sort of a makeup test date that we can do it if you need to. And that date still has significance for us today because it's like a second Passover, but we don't eat the sacrifice at all. So we don't need to celebrate it that way. But that's really where it comes from. You don't find that with other mitzvahs, that they come and complain. God created me without arms, so I can't put on tefillin. So God says, okay, I'm going to make tefillin for you that you don't need arms. Right? He doesn't do that. Right? And here he did. And that's because of how significant and important it is for as many people as possible to participate in this mitzvah. And if they can't, then God made it possible for them to do it at a later date. Right? That just gives a bit of an idea on that. All right, now in addition, if you've been in shul recently, you've noticed that for the last number of weeks, it's been very hectic because not only have we had things going on in shul, but leaving that aside, we also have special Torah readings. There are 4 special Torah readings that are read from Purim, just actually before Purim, right up until Passover, that signify different things. We had Parshas Para, where we read about the red cow. We had Parshas HaChodesh, that was last past Shabbos, where it talks about how God gave us the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, of sanctifying the moon and following a lunar calendar. We had the Parshas Zachor, the remembering of Amalek, that was on the Shabbos before Pesach, now before Purim. One of these that we have, right, is in addition to those 4, is also the idea of Shabbos HaGadol, the Great Shabbos. It isn't like those 4, but it is also a marked day. And that Shabbos is this coming Shabbos. That is called Shabbos HaGadol, the Great Shabbos. And everybody asks the question, why? Like, why is this Shabbos any greater than any other Shabbos? So there are many commentaries on it, but the one that I found the most understandable for me, that answers the question, was that if you look at the day of the week and the dates of the week when the actual Passover story happened, where the Jews actually took the lamb and tied it to their yard and put the blood on their doorposts and all that. So the day that they took the lamb into their yard was Shabbos. Now, what has that got to do with it? So you have to realize that when the Jews were slaves for over 200 years, right, they were born into slavery. Like, they only knew about slavery. They had no other life to look at. Now along comes God and says to them, I want you to go and take the God of your master, right, of the slave owners, and I want you to take it and I'm going to have you kill it. But before you do that, I'm not going to let you kill it in private. I want you to take the animal and put it in your front yard and leave it there until I tell you it's time to kill the animal. So they went, and here they were slaves. They went to their masters. They took a lamb, they brought it back to their house, as whenever the master or any other, right, non-Jewish Egyptian walked by, they'd see that the Jews took their God and attached a chain to it and chained him to their front yard. So they'd say to them, what are you doing, you bunch of slaves? What are you doing with our God? And they'd said, oh, our God told us to take this, and not only are we going to put him in our front yard, we're going to kill it, and we're going to eat it. And the Egyptians are going nuts, right? And here, this was the first act of slaves to do something beyond slavery, right? That's what they did when this happened. That happened on Shabbos. That's when it happened. So in that light, this was the great Shabbos where the Jews proved themselves. Because up until this point, every time things didn't go well, the Jews are always fighting and complaining, right? God sends Moshe to go and get the Jews out, and Pharaoh says, forget it, I'm going to make it worse for them. They go to Moshe and they say, what did you do to us? Right? Before we were slaves and we had to make bricks. Now we have to make bricks, and we have to also get the straw to make the bricks. Like, you made it worse, not better. The people were despondent. They didn't know what was going to happen. The fact that on this Shabbos they went and asserted themselves to the extent that they believed in God so much that they were prepared to show their neighbors that we have your God in our front yard, your false God, and we're going to kill it and eat it. Right? That was an enormous undertaking for someone to do. Right? You can imagine, we make movies out of things like that, like where a guy goes to jail and he doesn't allow the jail to affect him in a bad way, and in his mind he's living a normal life, and he's always thinking about that, and he raises above the violence of the jail. So too, that's what we were doing. Right? We raise ourselves up above the fact that we were slaves by going against our slave masters. Yeah.
Oh, were they not observing Shabbat laws at this time, or?
They kept Shabbat laws for the most part at the time of the Passover story by choice, not by requirement, because the Torah hadn't been given yet. So our forefathers, we know, kept Shabbos, and we know the slaves did not keep Shabbos. They weren't able to. Right? They were forced to work 7 days a week. But when they were able to do things, it says that they did it.
But so the sacrifice actually took place on Shabbat?
Well, yes, it could be on Shabbat. In this case, it wasn't. The animal was taken on Shabbat, right? But you have times when Passover falls out on Shabbat, and you would offer the sacrifice on that day, because the sacrifices supersede. In the temple, the Shabbat didn't have the same rules. Because you look at it this way, Shabbat and the temple are very similar, just in a different way. Shabbat is holiness and time. Right? It gives you a special time where things are different. And the temple is holiness and space. Right? It's a place that's holy. And therefore, if you are in the holiness of place, if you're in the temple, the rules of Shabbat don't apply. In other words, you have to keep Shabbat, but if there's a need to break it, you're allowed to. Like, you're allowed to break it to burn the incense, to burn the sacrifices. It's not life or death, right? But you're allowed to do it because it was at the same level in space that Shabbos is in time. So you were allowed to go one or the other. In fact, when we have the types of work that is forbidden on Shabbos, it all comes from the type of work we did in order to build the temple. And we know that whatever we did to build the temple, that is the work that's forbidden on Shabbos. And in the temple, they did many things that didn't seem to fit with Shabbos. Besides lighting fires and so forth, they did many other things that were almost like ignoring Shabbos. Like for instance, we won't. The rabbi said that we shouldn't use a lulav on Shabbos. Right? But really, it doesn't say that in the Torah. In the temple, they did. We don't blow the shofar on Shabbos, but in the temple, they did. They had many examples of things that they did in the temple that would break rules if we did it outside. Even the clothes of the Kohen were made out of shatnez, out of linen and wool, and we're not allowed to wear linen and wool at the same time. Right? But in order to fulfill the law of a Kohen, they did it because it was a very special place, right? And therefore it had its own rules. Just like Shabbos is a very special time, it has its own rules. Right? They both fit in that way.
Interesting.
So when we get to Shabbos HaGadol, then that's called Shabbos HaGadol because it's the day that the Jews proved to themselves and to the world that we are not going to remain slaves. We are going to have self-destiny. We're going to stand up for ourselves. Because you can imagine how difficult it would be if you and your parents and your grandparents were all born as slaves, and then you have to go and take the most precious thing that your master owns and slaughter it and tell him you're going to slaughter it. Right? That you must be shaking in your boots. To go and do that. A person who has power over you could kill you, and nobody will do anything to him about it. Right? And you go and tell him you're going to do that. Right? That's a very courageous thing, and that was a requirement that God wanted for the Jews to do before He would take them out, to see how much of a commitment they actually had. That's what that was showing us. That's why that time is called Shabbos HaGadol. And the custom on Shabbos HaGadol is that, and traditionally in most synagogues, the rabbis did not speak every week. They spoke only a few times a year. They would teach throughout the week, but they didn't, like I do, they didn't go like in shul at a certain time and give a speech every week. It wasn't done. And many of the shul, I've been in many shuls myself where they don't do it. The rabbi only speaks on special occasions. So those special occasions, right, among those is Shabbos HaGadol. There is 2 times a year where the rabbi is instructed to give courses, like to give a lecture that will tie into a topic that has to do with the upcoming season. So you'll have Shabbat Tshuva, the Shabbos of repentance, which is the Shabbos before Yom Kippur. And on that one, we have a special class, right, a special gathering, as every other shul does. And the rabbi gives a talk that is pertinent to that idea. With the idea to inspire people so that as Yom Kippur comes the next day or two, they can express, they can handle it. It's the same thing here. So we have this drasha here on Shabbos HaGadol. Right? It's the one of 2 times that I do these, and they're in the afternoon, and lots and lots of people come to them. I would say that all in all, probably 80% of every synagogue in the area is filled with people. Right? So if we have 200 families, right, I could have 160 people here. And the Rabbi could have 800 families. They'll probably have 1,000, 1,200 people there, and it's very well attended. And at this time, the rabbi will speak about something to do with Pesach, and then hopefully at the end have some inspirational talk to try to inspire people to keeping it better. So it's something to keep in mind. We're doing that this Shabbos, and every shul is doing that this Shabbos. Some of them do it at a different time. For the most part, everyone does it in the afternoon. It's just something that we should think about. Okay. Otherwise, let's see, we've got a number of things coming up for Pesach, so that schedule will be out shortly, and the classes and events and things that, of course, everybody is welcome to, and we'll take it on from there. Now, for the next 2 weeks, we won't meet. Next week is just 2 days before Pesach, and I've got a lot of stuff I have to do here, and the next one is on Pesach, and not that I can't meet on Pesach, but I've seen in the past that people often are busy with either working or with family, and it's not a good time. So we'll start again right afterwards. So that would be, we'll miss 2 weeks, and then we'll start again after that. But you should certainly feel free to come by to any of the classes in the Shabbos HaGadol Drush or anything like that you want to over the next period of time. We've got quite a bit going on. I was asked to do about 5 major classes, right, between now and the end of Passover. And there's, then there's the usual ones that go on as well. All right, so we'll conclude with that, and I'll wish everyone a wonderful Pesach. And you all do have my phone number. If you have any questions, you can feel free to call. Everybody else does, so don't think anything of it. I have some people who will stand in the store and text me a picture of a food item and wanting to know if it's okay for Pesach. Perfectly legitimate. It makes it a lot easier than my having to go to the store and look. All right, so thanks a lot.